Hey, everybody, and welcome. This is Dr. Jessica Wright. I am so excited to bring you the next part in our series on the tools for perseverance. This week, we're talking about hope. And we've talked about the first two steps of hope. We talked about have goals, hone those goals, right? And then our second step that we talked about yesterday was open your mind to different pathways. So we've got those first two goals. First, have a goal, and then second, open your mind to the different pathways you could take if your goal becomes blocked, right? If your way forward becomes blocked, what will you do? And today we're going to be talking about the third step, which is plan your success. And it's about creating a realistic picture, expectation of what success will look like and what the journey will look like on the way there. So let's get going. We've been starting each of our sessions this week with a quote about hope. I enjoyed this one. Emily Dickinson, she says, "I dwell in the possible." So keeping focused on the things that are possible. And when we're talking about hope, just a reminder, we're not talking about hope as an emotion that you might feel. Instead, this series is based on Snyder's hope theory. There's a theoretical model of hope created by Dr. Snyder in the 90s. And that model gives us the tools, the steps to create a skill. And this skill is the skill of persevering past obstacles towards your goal with a sense of agency. That's what hope is. Being able to move towards your goal with a sense of agency, a sense of power. Agency is a term that means a feeling of power over your own circumstances, not the things that are happening around you, but of what you can do, right? Your own behavior, a sense of power over your own behavior. So, I'm delighted to talk about this next step, which is planning your success. So I, when I was younger, really wanted to grow up to be a professor at a university. And I had a really specific picture about what it meant to be a professor. I thought that being a professor at a university was exactly like Indiana Jones. Y'all remember the early Indiana Jones movies? He basically goes around, having adventures, figuring stuff out, doing whatever he wants, and then he comes back and occasionally teaches classes to a room full of pupils that are just delighted to hear what he has to say. That was my original sort of understanding of what it meant to be a professor, and any of my faculty friends, friends who are faculty members at universities, know just how far from the truth this scenario really is. I remember sitting in my postdoctoral fellowship, and we were learning about the process of becoming faculty and the next steps and what it is that would happen. And at that point, I had spent more than a decade of acquiring more education and moving towards this goal. And I sat in a class where they talked about the next 6 steps that I would need to take in order to become a professor and get a faculty position and have grant funding. And I realized that's not what I wanted to do. So I realized I didn't want to be a grant-funded research scientist who was hired as a professor. This was my goal. And I had to reframe that goal and have a good understanding of what comes next. So I was grateful to be able to work with Dr. Jennifer Bryan, who she and I, this is us during our young and fruitful postdoctoral days. She and I worked side by side. We were both new cohorts. We were part of a new cohort of postdoctoral students in the Advanced Fellowship for Healthcare Training and Excellence in Education. And so we were able to work side by side. It was a new fellowship at the VA and do research. And Jen had a really clear expectation that she is better at me than doing research. She had a better idea of how that process works, and yet she has a really clear idea of her goals, that she wants to spend most of her time instead of chasing grants. She wants to spend most of her time teaching. And she's found a role in which she gets to spend a huge portion of her time teaching. And I think that was incredibly valuable for me to watch her be able to carve out and craft her goals and see what success really looks like. Another reason that Jen has been really inspirational to me was that within the past year, I've suffered a personal loss of my physical abilities that has been very difficult for me to deal with. So, I am a researcher. I do research. I get to teach all of you. I get to spend a lot of time reading about the latest concepts that you want to have presented to you. So whether it's learning more about linear regression so I can teach you the statistics you need to do your research, or if it's a session like this where I'm learning about hope, the first thing I do is I go and I start reading. And I read everything that I can get my hands on this subject, and then I synthesize the information and package it in a way where I could present it back to you. And in about a year ago, it's actually less than a year ago, about 9 months ago, I suffered a loss of my visual ability. So I've had a permanent change in my visual function, in which I will no longer be able to read. So I have an amazing ophthalmologist. I have an amazing occupational therapist that is, they're all helping me collaboratively to be able to figure out how to function. But I have lost my ability to read, and that's a key part of what it is that I do for a living. And so one of the things that has been really helpful for me to understand just how I need to plan out what the realistic version of my future looks like as a scientist, as a researcher, was having an understanding of what a person could do if they were visually impaired. So I'm a newly visually impaired person. I need to get a clear picture of what it is that I can and cannot do. And I am so grateful to have an example. Dr. Jennifer Bryan is visually impaired. And so I got to work alongside her and know that, for 2 years, I got to work next to her and know that the quality of work is in no way impacted by her visual impairment. And it's just a matter of me learning new tools, right? Me learning how to use things like a reader, right? So having my computer read back to me. I have a magnifier that I use. I have all kinds of different tools that are going to help me, and that I have a really realistic picture of what success will look like for me as a researcher, as a professor of sorts, as a I'm faculty at A&M and at U of H, and I am with the Institute for Academic Medicine, and I really enjoy doing research in the academic component of what I do. And reading is fundamental to everything I do. And it's really helpful to me. It creates hope within me when I have a realistic idea about what success looks like. So that's exactly it. You first have to ask yourself, what will success really look like? If your goal is to become a professor, don't watch Indiana Jones and think that is happening, that that's going to be your life. Instead, go sit with people who are faculty members. Go sit with people who are postdocs, or they're on their way to becoming faculty members, to get an understanding of what their day-to-day life looks like. And that's key too, right? Considering how is your daily routine going to change when you're able to achieve your goal, right? So what are some, and I'm saying daily routine because it's really, according to the literature from Snyder, it's incredibly helpful to find like tangible, very concrete ways in which you will spend your day when you have achieved your goal. So if your goal is to make it through COVID-19 and still be connected with your friends and family, having a clear picture of what that realistically looks like in your mind and what your daily routine is going to be. Does that mean that you are having a daily FaceTime with your family member? Does it mean that you are using video chat, or, sending, taking pictures and sending them back and forth? Are you having a weekly, we just had a weekly Zoom call with 30 members of my extended family. It was like a mini family reunion. That was an experience. I don't know if y'all have tried that before. That was an experience. It was really interesting. But getting a really clear understanding of what your daily routine is going to look like, and then picturing the challenges and the surprises that you can expect. One of the most important parts of this step, right? So this is the third step, plan your success, is understanding what the most common barriers are. If you want to go back to school and get your PhD, one of the first things you should do is figure out what's the most common reason that people drop out of school, right? That they never finish their PhD. Go find out what are the huge barriers, what are the milestones that you know that are going to be coming up in front of you, and then go figure out how you get around those, right? What's the most efficient way to get around them? Pre-plan basically for barriers. Anytime you have the opportunity, pre-plan for barriers, because one of the things that it does, if you do yesterday's step where we're talking about open your mind to different pathways, right? Opening your mind to different pathways, knowing that there are multiple routes to achieve your goal, and then understanding that you're likely to encounter barriers and what those barriers are going to be means that when they happen, they're not a surprise to you anymore, right? If you face a challenge with your dissertation, right? So finishing the dissertation is the main reason that people don't finish a PhD program. So if you face a challenge with your dissertation, knowing that is to be expected, that's a big component of why people drop out, and having a plan for getting around that is going to make that initial blow, right? If your committee comes back and says, no, you've got to start over with your dissertation, or no, you have to change something significant, you have a plan in place that says, okay, here's this barrier, here's how I plan to get around it, and if this whole path gets blocked off, here's my backup plan, right? Here's my pathway I've already come up with. Reading through the literature on Snyder's Hope Theory and how this theoretical model works, that's your key. Going back and forth between creating new pathways and then planning for barriers and making a plan for when those barriers occur is going to be fundamental to your success. And not success at continuing along a specific pathway, but success in having hope, right? If that's our aim with all of this, is to build hope within ourselves. That's really helpful. And if you were in my Science of Innovation series, we talked a lot about how your brain has to be trained to think creatively, right? Just like flexing a muscle, we've got to strengthen our ability to think creatively. And if every time you set a goal for yourself, like tomorrow I'm going to, go for a long walk, or tomorrow I'm going to finish that piece of my work in 30 minutes instead of in an hour, whatever it is, whatever your goal is, when you set a goal, immediately think through, trigger your brain. You write down a goal. This is what I'm going to do today. Trigger your brain to immediately think, okay, what are the different pathways that I'm going to go down, and what are the barriers that I can expect, right? So what are the barriers, and then how do I get around them? And if I have to go down a different pathway, what does that look like? Pre-planning is going to give your brain the practice it needs so that when you set a larger goal for yourself, right? When you set one of those personal goals, those things that are really attached to your individual needs, and something comes up, it doesn't feel devastating in the same way, right? We're all going to grieve those pathways. We talked about that yesterday, right? Grieving the pathways that we lost, and yet knowing that we can get around them because we have plans, right? And even if we don't have a plan for the next pathway, knowing that there are other pathways and that we have the skill to develop those other pathways. These are the 4 steps. We talked about honing your goals, or just having goals, opening your mind to different pathways, planning your success, including making a plan for not only what it realistically looks like when you achieve your goal, but also what are the barriers that could pop up, right? Tomorrow we're going to talk about enjoying the journey, which is one of the ways that you keep this going long term, because you might start off really enthusiastic about this, but in order to make it maintain over time, we've got to do this last step, which is enjoy the journey. So here's my question for you, your homework for today. How will you define success during these hard times? What are your goals? what's a realistic picture of life when you achieve your goals? We talked about schoolwork with my children and having an understanding of what success looks like, helping them do their homework yesterday. And that's one of the things that I take to heart, is that I need to define success very carefully. Right? What is at the root of what I'm trying to achieve? And then what is a realistic picture of life when I have achieved those goals? That's your homework to work on, and I can't wait to talk to you about this tomorrow. All right, bye.